This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
My message to the Prime Minister this week is man up, Starmer. Have some guts, face down.
Shut the fuck up, fat man. This ain't none of your goddamn business.
Quiet Riot.
Hello and welcome back to Quiet Riot Sunday School.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
I'm Alex Andreu. Naomi has the weekend off, but what a subs bench we have when I can call on my dear friend and fabulous Guardian columnist, Zoe Williams, to fill in. Hello, Zoe.
Hello, Alex.
Welcome to your Sunday school debut. Are you feeling suitably virginal?
Thank you very much. I know we have to find some way to, I don't know, waylay Naomi so I can do it more often.
Let's dive into the week's sort of big stories. You wrote a piece a few days ago entitled "Why Do I Love Greggs? Let Me Count the Ways." That same evening, a Greggs was looted. Coincidence?
I really love the alternative universe in which I am orchestrating the racist riots in order to undo them as precisely they are being undone, right? It's like if I had been organising the racist riots, this is exactly what would happen. They would set fire to a load of stuff. They wouldn't actually get as far as harming anyone, and then they would all be put in prison. It has the stroke of my mastermind.
Do you think this is it, riot-wise? For now, I guess. I mean, obviously, those elements are there always. But is this phase of them finished, do you reckon?
Do you know, there's always something a bit ersatz about it. It's like I've been listening to a lot of people and interviewed Nazir Afzal, who it was, of course, the chief Crown Prosecutor, but also was himself the victim of a huge amount of racism in the 60s and 70s in Birmingham. A lot of people are saying, I remember this from the 60s and 70s. My children don't remember it, but I do, and it's horrific to have them see it, and I'm glad my parents aren't alive to see it. So it's very chastening to hear that, and it does slightly mute what I'm going to say next, which is I think there just feels like something a bit kind of fake, a bit sudden, a bit made by Nigel Farage, a little bit Russian bot implanted, a little bit, 2 days in the pub, then have a riot, and that kind of thing is going to wear off with a hangover. I don't think this has the kind of bedded in quality of a really serious racist movement that's going to go on and on and on. Doesn't mean it's not serious. Doesn't mean I'm not worried about it. Doesn't mean I don't think that online movements can have real life consequences. But it does mean I don't think we're looking at the beginning of a wave that culminates in kind of the NF at the end of in the 70s or the BNP in 2006-7.
Do you know, I live about just a quarter of a mile up the road from the Millwall football ground. And just to make this very clear, the vast majority of Millwall fans are absolutely lovely, but they do have a core, a sort of a firm in there that is a pretty overlapping circle with the sort of people we've seen. And it was their first match of the season today, and they lost at home. My house is sort of between the ground and the tube station. And I was holding my breath because I thought, they'll be passing corner shops and kebab shops and chicken shops that are run by people of colour. And nothing happened. They were really beautifully behaved, and everyone was in very good spirits and glad that the football season is starting again. And my sense is that if we haven't seen little pockets of stuff kick off around the start of the football season, it's probably the end of this phase of it.
I'm not getting massive groundswell of movement. I'm getting much more. On Facebook when people get unbelievably angry about a thing. It just has a weird quality, it's like it will be a picture of a policeman mistreating a police dog, or it will be a woman parking in a thoughtless way. they'll get unbelievably angry, and you can see there's something underneath that. You can see there's something that's not meaningless underneath that. But it's so but it just doesn't have kind of embeddedness or
it feels a bit hollow. It feels like
feels a bit hollow,
like it's a big size performance.
Yeah, exactly. And there's something about these which kind of really plays to the theatricality of social media, the kind of performed outrage. Which doesn't really have ballast.
What's interesting about that is that I think it is because they drunk their own Kool-Aid from social media, which is just full of blue ticks and fake accounts just applauding every single word these people say. And the narrative in the press has been for years now that this is the silent majority and the whole of England is really pissed off at this. They're just scared to talk because no one will broach the subject. And it feels to me like that's been going on for such a long time that they began to believe it. They began to think there is huge support for us out there. And then they organized something that was too big in scope. They didn't go, we'll do one big demonstration in London. They said, we'll do it in 50 cities up and down the country. And then no one showed up. Their own narrative came into contact with reality. And in a city like Sunderland, of 250,000 people, it was like 200 people that showed up. And got drunk and burned something.
Yeah, and it always used to be a thing that pisses the left off, right? That the tabloids have absolutely no consistency. 1 minute they're like, 1 minute they're hunt the paedophile, the next minute they're how dare these vigilantes destroy our peaceful streets. But I can see that these kind of spontaneous right-wing demonstrations, these spontaneous racist demonstrations, are going to feel absolutely gutted to see that these papers that had been kind of galvanizing and mustering and cheerleading for them are now immediately like, oh, isn't it beautiful to see the anti-racists out on the street? They've had years of being
That's been really weird. Like the front page of the Express and the Daily Mail going, this is Britain, it's beautiful, with a tear in their eye. It's like,
but
what?
It's only weird if you haven't been complaining about their double standards since literally you were born. That kind of racist minority hasn't been complaining about the double standard because it hasn't really touched them. And now it is touching them. And it's absolutely outrageous. That is one point on which I would make common cause with the racist right, is how outrageous it is to see the Daily Mail celebrate a peace march when they've been whipping up racism for as long as any of us can remember.
Two-tier reporting, innit, mate?
Yeah, nice.
The one thing that I think has had big emotional impact, empathy is meant to be universal. So if I try to put myself in those people's shoes and those people's minds, I think the one thing that would affect me would be to see the people come together in larger numbers than the riot the night before, with brooms and stuff, cleaning up the streets the next morning. I think that has been a genuinely effective way of showing resistance and solidarity, don't you think?
I don't know, because it annoys me, that kind of bake-off thing. Oh, isn't it wonderful to see the people with the brooms? That really pissed me off after the 2011 riots, actually.
You're so cynical.
Aren't we such a nice nation? Look, here we are with our stupid brooms. I don't know. Am I making a coherent point? I don't know. But
I don't think you are. Let me help you. I don't think you are. I know what you mean in that there is something performative in that.
Yeah, there's something performative. There's something self-congratulatory. There's something slightly bullshit. As heartwarming as it is when bricklayers go and rebuild a mosque, I'm not thrilled about having to get to that point before we iterate any community spirit or togetherness. I just think it's quite a pat response, I think it's the kind of thing that you think when you're not really taking it as seriously as it needs to be taken.
You see, as a theatre person, I appreciate it because I think the riot yesterday was performative. and this is a performance in response that actually has the right message to give. So I don't mind it at all. I actually find it really touching.
Actually, no, I mean, I quite like, unbelievably, and this has never happened, I'm changing my point of view in sentence, because now you say that.
I love that.
Well, now you say that, you're absolutely right. It's like if some people are going to do a kind of something slightly fake and theatrical, then yeah, the answer to that is something quite theatrical and large back.
I love that, mate. That's a wonderful moment to be treasured, that probably never to be repeated again.
Never.
Quiet Riot.
It's been notable that every single newspaper has gone straight away with far-right thugs. A lot of the leaders of that movement have also rode back with just incredible speed. I think a lot of them must be quite worried, actually, about legal consequences, and must be getting legal advice to say, distance yourself quickly, unequivocally, and at length. But there have been two notable exceptions, I think, and they are the Telegraph and the Spectator. They are still peddling very much that narrative that what fuels this is legitimate concerns, and no one has dared to speak about immigration for the last 20 years. I mean, it's obviously disingenuous, but why do you think they are sticking with?
I think that the Spectator in particular is in a really, really difficult position, because if they are not like the Daily Mail. They cannot turn around and hold the exact opposite point of view to the one they held yesterday without that having intellectual consequences for them. And if they wash their hands of Douglas Murray now, they have to admit that they've been promulgating race hate for as long as they've been publishing him. I mean, it was quite interesting today. Andrew Neil was getting flack on Twitter for Douglas Murray's publication, and he was saying he's not on staff. Now, that is the most insane thing I've ever heard, pointing to somebody's contract with the publication to justify the fact that they've been spewing like really hardline Islamophobia for a very long time. And I think what we're seeing there is a sunk cost fallacy. The Telegraph and the Spectator feel that if they take their foot off the gas for 1 second, they're going to end up having to apologise quite profoundly for everything they've published for the last 10 to 12 years.
As nice as it is to see people noticing this, I have to say there was a part of me that thought the Spectator was writing puff pieces about Golden Dawn 10 years ago. These people wear actual Nazi uniforms. They go on an annual pilgrimage to Mussolini's mausoleum, I should say. And they had Taki writing week after week that they're just nice kids who want to help their neighborhood. They're no different than UKIP. And he was on staff as recently as December 2023, which was after his conviction in Switzerland for attempted rape.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought Taki up, because I think that's actually part of their fig leaf, right? What they do is they publish these figures. Taki was the quintessential one, who are kind of very eccentric, and they, under the guise of eccentricity, they normalize a lot of hate speech. And so Douglas Murray is meant to be this kind of maverick academic. Taki was meant to be this fine, life-loving outlier. And through that, they maverick wash hate speech, and then they can wash their hands of it, because they can say, oh, well, he's just a real eccentric character. But the truth of that is that if for 1 second you are required to join the dots between Douglas Murray's Islamophobia, Taki's neo-Nazism, a lot of the kind of gender hatred that they also publish, if you were ever to kind of make a whole spectrum thing and say this is the agenda, then they would have to admit that they are essentially intellectualizing a lot of far-right talking points. And then that would be very problematic for them, but not because I think they would feel embarrassed or ashamed, just because a lot of readers, they're picking that up in order to look clever to their friends in the golf club. They don't want to be in a far-right movement.
Yeah, and the pattern is undeniable. I mean, especially with the Spectator, like the soft soaping of figures like Wilders and Orbán and Zemmour. Every time a new fascist appears basically in a European country, they do a big profile on him.
It's really interesting because I remember having this argument with the foreign correspondent of The Telegraph, where I said on World at One, I think, that Orbán was hard right. And he went into an absolute Twitter mayhem about how I was crazy, how the left was crazy, how progressives cried wolf, how Orbán was a totally legitimate politician. And he seemed like he's not at the Telegraph anymore. And I think he's somewhere quite sensible. And he seemed like quite a sensible person. But it was extremely, extremely important in that moment that nobody was allowed to call Orbán hard right. Now we look at him and we say, of course he's hard right. There's always splashback. If you're trying to play that double game where you make it look like a very urbane dinner party joke, but you're actually promulgating a far right agenda, there's always going to be splashback from unexpected places. And I think this is one of them. In fact, we can do this when we get to the American elections, because they ran an amazing column about Kamala Harris, which I thought, I've never read anything like it.
Just to wrap this up, do you think Starmer has got this broadly right? It seems to me that a lot of them attacked him again very early on. They went, oh, he's being very ineffective, either too hard or too lenient, not had enough Cobra meetings, which I thought was actually quite funny, that they seem to distill action into having meetings as opposed to actually doing stuff.
But we can't have it both ways, Alex. If we're going to really slate Boris Johnson for missing the first 6 Cobra meetings of COVID, then we have to take Cobra meetings seriously, even if we have no idea what happened in one.
for sure, but Starmer had like a meeting with all the heads of police and the mayors the day after the first riot. It just wasn't called a Cobra meeting, but it wasn't like he was on holiday. Do you think he's got it roughly right? Has he silenced the critics?
Look, I have anxieties about Keir. He's slow on his feet. He won't call out racism for what it is until he's sure that the whole world and his dog is behind him. He won't draw a meaningful distinction between a race riot where you're checking cars to see if they've got white people in them and a Just Stop Oil disruption, even though we can all see there's a meaningful distinction. He's kind of very, very cautious around being identified as a lefty liberal lawyer. And that is my reservation about him, because I think if you are that, then be that. Nevertheless, he is modelling public service. He is modelling a kind of coherent philosophy of how to do it. He does seem to be a person who knows what he's doing.
How has he triggered Musk to the degree that he has? I mean, it's getting really quite weird now.
Don't you think, though, that this is very like Sadiq Khan triggering Trump the way that he did? Everybody was like, how has Donald Trump even heard of Sadiq Khan? It was such a weird thing for him to go off on, that we had this Muslim mayor. And that's like, everybody else was like, we never really noticed that. And Trump is trying to portray it like we're in the middle of some clash of civilizations in which the Muslims have taken over our capital city. I think in exactly the same way, Keir Starmer is just a shibboleth for Elon Musk. He's just a kind of figurehead for a broken progressive worldview that Musk is then going to go after. But I think, like anything, when you're using somebody as a figurehead, but you've got no real knowledge or expertise about what you're dealing with, you end up looking quite stupid.
It feels to me like there's other stuff at play behind this. And I don't know exactly what it is. There's a part of me that thinks Musk is kind of testing the tensile strength when it comes to this stuff ahead of the American election. There is a part of me that thinks he's found a sort of similar democracy, not quite so big, but big, and he wants to see how far he can push it. There's another part of me that thinks he senses there is harsh regulation coming from the UK and the EU, and he's placing his little marker to say, see, they're trying to silence me because I criticize them a lot.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's definitely true that he's using it as a kind of, he's testing his own strength, and he's testing the strength of Twitter, and he's testing his convening power. You know, how many people can he get in his online army? But the reason it doesn't kind of ring true or make any real sense, and the reason Keir seems quite nonplussed by it, is that it doesn't really relate to the politician or the man. It's just a kind of symbolic act.
I think there was like one tweet the day after the first riot from Sunak and nothing since then. Not a word. Okay, it's Rishi Sunak, but I think we have a right to expect a little bit more of the opposition, considering how conciliatory and supportive Starmer has been throughout his tenure as leader of the opposition when it comes to the sort of national crisis stuff. So I've been quite disappointed by Sunak's reaction. But all the other leadership candidates, they're placing themselves around this. And the one that's really stuck out is Priti Patel, who seemed to say the precise opposite thing 3 or 4 days ago, and then yesterday came up with some complaint about two-tier policing. What do you think is going on there?
It's really interesting, right? All the Tory candidates, all the Tory leadership candidates, it looked like their gambit was going to be how far they could tilt towards reform in order to lead the party. And the absolute absence of any more moderate figures really rammed home how critical that was in their calculations. There is no point going for this party as a moderate. You have to go as the person who can win back the reform votes. You don't have to go as the person who's going to win back the centre. Now, couldn't be a worse time for them for these riots to occur because they cannot get any closer to Nigel Farage while at the same time looking like they're interested in public order. And yet they cannot look like they're going for the centre vote when they know that the party, as it's currently configured, as the membership is currently configured, isn't going to go for that. They're going to go for kind of Farage light, or they're going to defect to reform altogether. Actually, I kind of see why Sunak's staying a bit quiet.
Yeah.
Because if you were going to say anything at all, it would be to model the sort of one nation unity conservatism that we'd expect at a time of national crisis. And he can't really do that because he's going to be instantly wrong-footed by any one of the leadership candidates.
What the fuck does he care? He's done.
Why the hell does
his political career is over? He might as well do the right thing for once.
But listen, Sunak really genuinely doesn't give a shit about the country. You've got to think, you've got to consider.
That's harsh, but I think very fair.
And I don't understand why we didn't ask this question more often at the time that he became Prime Minister. We asked a lot whether he was too rich to be Prime Minister, but we never asked, why does a man that rich want to be at the helm of an advanced, mature democracy? Because rich people don't normally do that. It doesn't further their interests. The only way in which it furthers their interests is if they're trying to change that democracy to something less democratic. And I think now that that's kind of passed for him, it is revealed how shallow his public service really was. He doesn't really care what's happening.
I have to say, I think the answer is more prosaic than that. There's been such a corporatization of the Conservative Party that these ambitious young'uns, they just want to see how far they can get. They just want the next promotion as quickly as possible, as if it were some private company. They don't stop to think, what does that position entail and what do I want to deal with it? They just want their career to advance because that's what you do if you were still in Goldman Sachs.
I don't know. I mean, I think you say your reading is the more cynical. I think my reading is much more cynical. I think they're acting on behalf of a billionaire class who genuinely, per Peter Thiel, think that democracy and their freedom are incompatible.
Well, they're not either or, so I buy your explanation completely.
In that case, I'll buy yours.
Has any of the candidates surprised you, sort of pleasantly or unpleasantly?
I guess it's to Priti's credit that she sort of tilted back to the centre rather than get her hands really dirty. But then if I'm going to be completely honest, I'm really, really revelling like I'm in a warm bath in the experience of not giving a shit about the Conservative Party. Really revelling.
Well, that rather puts the kibosh on my next question, Zoe, which is what's your current prediction? No, what's your prediction? Who do you think will emerge? Maybe as the final two.
My prediction is as it was from even before July the 4th, which is that actually the person who comes in on the inside lane and says we're merging with Reform and Nigel Farage as the new leader of the Conservative Party is going to just get the win behind them.
Oh God, what a prospect.
I just do not see in that party any commitment to moderation. I don't see the greybeards saying, are we sure this is a good idea? I don't see any Ken Clarke figures saying, well, he doesn't share our values. I don't see any of the brakes on that express train. So without those breaks, the train is quite exciting to watch, and that gives it a lot of momentum.
Yeah.
Quiet. Riot.
Okay, American elections. Let's touch on them briefly, just to leave listeners with a little bit of joy in their heart.
I know.
So, latest polling, I have it here. Latest polling. Sorry, let me put my glasses on. God, I'm so fucking decrepit. 538 could do all the big aggregate ones.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got their latest aggregate estimate out. And it's now just outside the margin of error. Harris leads Trump nationally by 2.1%.
Oh, that's quite exciting, because it was only 1.8.
Yeah, isn't that exciting? And there's been a big poll in the New York Times that looks at 3 swing states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Harris now has a 4-point lead in all 3 of them if you do it as a head-to-head. And if you involve alternate candidates like Kennedy, West, Stein, and those people, then her lead in Michigan goes up to 5 points. Her lead in Wisconsin goes up to 6 points.
Do you know what? The first time I ever read this idea was in the 2016 election, Trump-Clinton. Somebody said, it's not supporters, it's not groundswell support that's important. It's stans, it's superfans. If you can see somebody with superfans, even if their numbers aren't great, there's something going on that you need to sit up and pay attention to. And at that time, the superfans were all for Trump. Did Hillary Clinton have a single superfan? Even the celebrities who turned out on her front row of her meetings didn't look like superfans. And I felt that ever since, that was my worry for 2019, because Boris Johnson, for all his failings, did seem to generate that kind of energy. And I can't tell you how cheering it is just to see genuine superfans for Waltz and Kamala. Whether it's Charlie XCS calling Kamala the original brat, whether it's the huge rally for Waltz when he was taking the piss out of Trump's numbers, whether it's the white guys for Kamala. Did you see that movement?
Yeah. White dudes for Kamala.
There's so many people who aren't just in their houses picking up the phone to a pollster saying, yeah, I'll probably vote Democrat. I kind of think I'm just so excited. And furthermore, can I just make one more point?
Of course.
Even before Biden had stood down, I always said American political commentariat and the British political commentariat were underestimating the female vote and how much abortion legislation means to women. I've always thought that. It's always been a thing. But I think now we've got like a workable ticket, and we've got the very pro reproductive rights Waltz, and we've got Kamala, of course, who's just amazing on that stuff. You can really feel the energy coming from that kind of long-term feminist movement. They're like, yes, you think you're coming after our physical autonomy? Think again. And before that really had anything to coalesce round, even though you could feel it bubbling under, you couldn't really see it. I can really see it now.
In with all the enthusiasm, there is an equal amount of relief that Biden's out of the race. You kind of sense it. What's really been wonderful to see is that none of this seems orchestrated by the party.
No.
Like all these Zoom calls, black dudes for Kamala, white dudes for Kamala, black women for Kamala. The queue outside the Arizona rally was insane. The singers coming round to her, all the brat stuff, and all of it seems to originate from the base upwards. Even their big sort of lines, like we're not going back, that felt like it's something the audience threw at her on the first night, on the first rally, and she repeated it back to them. And all of that has a really organic and positive and really hopeful feel to it. My only concern is that if some big event happens that makes that joy and that enthusiasm inappropriate, that then means the Harris-Waltz campaign has to pivot to being serious. That slightly worries me.
I think you're right. And I was very worried by the attempted assassination of Trump, because I knew all the right-wing commentators were going to say, you guys wish they'd succeeded.
Yeah.
And no left-wing commentator would be prepared to say, yes, actually, I do wish they'd succeeded. And so there would be this chasm would open up between what they were saying they felt and what they actually felt. And you saw everybody rowing back from calling him a Nazi immediately after. Now, we shouldn't have to row back from that. We should be able to say, don't shoot him in the head. And he's still an incredibly dangerous force for democracy. But for a while there, for a week there, people were ceasing to say he's dangerous for democracy. And Biden was apologizing for saying, get him in the crosshairs, when that's actually perfectly normal democratic language, perfectly normal political language, rather.
What's really been interesting is I was watching a piece on MSNBC last night. And what one of the commentators was saying was that the Harris campaign has found a way to say the same thing, but with a positive spin on it. So instead of going, he's dangerous to democracy, what they're doing is saying, we represent freedom.
Yeah.
Which is the same message, but framed completely different. It's framed in a way that leaves him out of the debate. Yeah. And I think that's been really effective. And it's really triggered him. You can see it. He's really hurt by the attention they're getting. So let's say you're advising Trump, okay?
Uh-huh.
How does he pivot? What does he do? More anger doesn't seem a winning response to joy, right? So what does he do?
I think the boot is on the other foot, right? Because just as the progressives were seen as not being completely honest following the assassination attempt, Trump is now seen as not being completely honest because he is a racist and a misogynist. So everybody, his base will be wanting him to attack Kamala on racist, misogynist grounds. But actually, he can't do that. He literally can't do that. Not just because he would be in plain sight, because he's never been ashamed of that, but because where's he got to go? He can attack her for being a black woman, but what's she going to say? Well, yes, that's exactly what I am. He's got no quarter. He's basically... This is basically like he's playing Elden Ring and he's got to his boss fight and he's got no tools.
We were saying exactly that thing, Zoe, about the mind your own damn business line. That it's such a clever way to frame that debate, because all they can say is, no, we won't mind our own business. We will interfere in your decisions. And it's such an un-Republican thing to be saying that it's a proper snooker, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And I'm just loving watching it. I mean, for the first time in probably 8 years, I'm just loving watching a political process. I've got almost no anxiety about it. I mean, everybody else is like, watch the polls, they're creeping up. I'm thinking this is not happening for Trump. It's not happening.
It feels like a tailspin at the moment. So, but 3.5 months to go, long time, especially in the current environment. Zoe, I've kept you far, far longer than I intended. And that's only because I just love chatting to you. Like, if we weren't recording this and we were just having a beer, I would be just as happy. So thank you.
Well, that's praise indeed. And I obviously would always be happier if we were having a beer.
Thank you, my darling. And that's it for this week's Quiet Riot Sunday School. Thank you so much for sharing part of your weekend with us, and enjoy the remainder.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith, Alex Andreu and Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta, artwork by Simona Canelu. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Soundstone Global.
Quiet Riot.
Let's look at that as a sort of rehearsal.
Also,
I'm so sorry, mate. I can't believe I did that.
No, it's to be fair to you, when it's recording, it clearly says recording. So
how is that fair to me, you dick?
I mean, I don't know.